Hello, hello, and welcome to the Savage Stream. I'm your host, Charisse, the Sci-Fi Savage, and today we are going to be talking about my top 10 picks for best villain in Star Trek: The Next Generation. So, hello, we've got PS2 Cypher here first. I saw that. If you're joining live, let me know where you're tuning in from. If you're watching on the replay, put hashtag replay in the comments so that I know you were there. So, let's get started with my first pick. And that is Kivas Fajo. So this character was in the episode The Most Toys. And what he did was he kidnapped Data to make him part of his collection. Okay. So this guy was a collector of rare and exotic things. So think like an endangered species where there's only one left, or some kind of delicacy, some kind of, fruit or vegetable or something that was on a planet that doesn't even exist anymore. He had kind of a museum / zoo going on his ship, and he wanted Data to be his prized possession, his greatest piece in the collection, because as far as he knew, Data was the only Soong type android in the galaxy, in the world, in the universe. So he was like, this is going to be my crowning achievement, and everyone's going to be so impressed by me and so jealous of me. So he kidnaps Data in this whole big ruse where he made it look like Data actually passed away in a shuttle accident so that the Enterprise wouldn't go looking for him. And then he thought for some reason that Data would just go along with this whole plan. Who knows why? And was just going to impress all of his friends. And so, of course, Data was like, I'm not playing this game. I didn't want to be here. Send me back to the ship. And all of these things ensued. Basically, Data ended up playing nice because of all of the threats that Kivas Fajo made to his own people who would be harmed if Data didn't play nice. Well, by the end of the whole thing, Data finally gets the weapon away from him and decides, you know what? This guy is just too evil to go on. I have to put it into this or nothing will stop this man. So as he's about to pull the trigger on the phaser, he gets emergency beamed out by the Enterprise, who managed to save the day. So they put Kivas Fajo in jail. And at the end, he's like, oh, Data, I bet you must love this, seeing me in a cage. Ha, ha, ha. And Data's like, meh, because he has no emotions. But if he had emotions, he would have liked that moment. So the reason why I picked Kivas Fajo is just for his sheer lack of concern for anyone or anything that's not him. He did not care who he had to trick or bribe or lie to. He didn't care about anyone's lives. All he cared about was impressing his friends, who were other kind of creepy dealers. So he definitely deserves to go on this list as one of the worst villains. Hey, I'm doing well. How are you? Let me know in the chat. So person number 2 on my list is Ardra. That is the person from the episode Devil's Due. In that episode, Ardra comes to this planet and says, look, inside of your contractual history, basically kind of like the mythos of this society, you made a deal with the devil that if the devil helped you out, it would bring the whole entire population out of chaos and war and strife and all of that. So now I think hundreds and hundreds of years have gone by, and the deal was when I come back in like 1,000 years or whatever it was, then the planet belongs to me. So she shows up and she's like, I'm here. Thank you for my planet. And all chaos just completely ensues. The whole planet goes crazy because they're like, the devil's here. She's come back. She's taken the planet. She just so happened to pull this con when the Enterprise was passing by. So Picard is like, no, you're not. But she has all these incredible powers. She can change her shape at will to look like anyone. She can make the entire planet shake like an earthquake with just like a thought. And she has all these crazy superpowers. She made the Enterprise disappear completely at one point so that the crew couldn't get back. So the planet was the planetary leader was like, I'm pretty sure that this is the devil, and we did make that deal, and the planet does kind of belong to her. But Picard's like, no, let's do a trial. Let's bring Data in as the objective observer and see if we can disprove this, because I'm pretty sure she's a con artist. Turns out she was a con artist. But what a con. So the reason why I put her on this list is because just the sheer ambition that she had of claiming an entire planet just on kind of smoke and mirrors and these tricks that she can do with her advanced technology. I was more impressed than angered by her, honestly, because I was like, who steals a planet? But I think she definitely deserves to be on this list because she was committed. She believed in what she was trying to do. And if it wasn't for Picard and the Enterprise, she would have definitely got that planet. Good luck on Tuesday. Number 3, the third villain on my list is Kieran McDuff from the episode Conundrum. So in this episode, every single person on the Enterprise has their mind wiped by we don't know what it is, but suddenly they wake up, they don't know who they are, they don't know where they are, they don't know what's going on, they don't know anything, and they kind of, even the computers have been messed with in some kind of way where they're not really working properly. When they manage to dig out some information from the database, they discover that they're at war with some alien race and they're on a mission to go and destroy their secret headquarters base or whatever. And they're on radio silence because this mission's so critical. They're not allowed to communicate with Starfleet or anyone else. They just have to follow the directions and go and destroy this base. Well, all along the way, things are seeming really suspicious. Like, why is the Enterprise far outmatching every single defense that this other culture has? Come to find out that it was Lieutenant Commander McDuff, who's not really a member of the Enterprise, but really a member of an alien species that was warring with that other species, who somehow wiped everybody's brains, including the computers, and tricked them all into fighting this war for him. So I added him on the list because he single-handedly almost won an entire war through some incredible technology. Now, the thing that always gets me about this particular species and this particular alien is that they have incredible technology to kind of do a mind wipe and also wipe the computers and change them. But for some reason, they didn't have enough technology for weapons to fight their enemies. And I just thought that was interesting because I thought, what kind of society would prioritize technology of the mind over prioritizing kind of like weapons and defense and stuff like that? I think that'd be a really interesting cultural study to like go a little bit deeper in, to get a little more backstory, or where are they now for those particular warring species. But of course we never do. I just thought it would be interesting. PS2 Cypher says, I think the Ferengi would try to swindle a planet. They absolutely would. I don't think they would be successful though. just something about the Ferengi. They just don't stir menace in the hearts of their foes. And Ardra definitely did. People were terrified of her. Okay, that was number 3 on my list. So number 1 was Kivas Fajo. Number 2 was Ardra. Number 3 was Kieran McDuff. The 4th villain on my list is not technically a person. It's a whole species. And these are the alien parasites from the episode Conspiracy. So these alien parasites took over the brains and bodies of some of the highest officials in Starfleet in order to covertly take over the entire Federation, full planets, whole species, and everything else. Because they're a parasite, the person's body looks the same, but their behavior is totally weird. The episode Conspiracy is actually, it's pretty good. It's super creepy. It's pretty good. You're like, what is going on right now? And we actually first hear about them a lot earlier in the episode called Coming of Age, where Admiral Quinn and Lieutenant Commander Remick are telling Picard there's something fishy going on in Starfleet Command. People are not who they seem to be. They look the same, but they don't have any of the same memories. You know, something weird is going on. We don't know who to trust. And Picard's like, okay, that sounds a little paranoid, but maybe it's true. Then when we get to Conspiracy, Admiral Quinn comes on board the Enterprise and he's like, everything's good. Everything's swell. I don't know what you're talking about. I never said that. And Picard's like, oh no, he's one of them. So that episode's super good. And he was one of them, unfortunately. Him among many, many, including Remick, who was like the leader somehow of the parasite things. I don't know. But the reason why I put them on the list is because they almost took over not just a planet like Ardra, but the entire Federation and all allied planets. And they did it without firing a single weapon, right? I mean, maybe the hosts that they were a part of fired some weapons, but in general, you know, they did it covertly. They did it sneakily. So they definitely deserve some kind of award for best villain for that alone. They followed up on that lost plot hole in Star Trek Online. Ooh, okay. Let me know how they did that. See, I don't look up a lot of like fan fiction and stuff like that because it messes with my memory of like the main timeline and ideas. But I always want to know. I always want to know what happened with these characters or what could have happened. Okay, number 5 on my list is Sayla. Sayla is a Romulan commander who is also the daughter of Tasha Yar, which was such a fun character. So excited when I saw her on screen because it was like, oh my gosh, it's Tasha Yar, but she's a Romulan. What's going on? So basically, Tasha Yar's life was ended by the tar monster named Armus. But then in yesterday's Enterprise, there's a time rift and some timey-wimey stuff happens. Tasha Yar is back. Guinan goes, she's not supposed to be here. Something's wrong. You got to send them back into the rift. You got to send the Enterprise C back into the rift and fix the timeline because this war is not supposed to be going on. So they send them back into the rift, but Tasha Yar, knowing that she doesn't exist in this timeline, decides to go with them. So when she goes back into the rift, she goes back in time, and then this Romulan commander general, I think it was general, this Romulan general, like gets a crush on her, marries her, they have a daughter. A couple years into this daughter's life, Tasha makes a break for it. And the daughter at this point is 4, and she doesn't want to leave her home. So she starts calling out like, guards, my mom's acting crazy. They catch them, and then with Tasha Yar. Then Tasha Yar is done for real. But her daughter, Sayla, grows up, and looks exactly like Tasha, but has this huge chip on her shoulder against the Federation. Now, here's why I added her to this list. I feel like she is a legitimate threat to the Federation. Again, not just a planet and not just the Enterprise, but the whole Federation. And she's done this in a couple of ways. First, she was the puppet master behind Geordi LaForge's brainwash in the episode Mind's Eye. So it was kind of like Manchurian Candidate. He got brainwashed into assassinating somebody, but somehow they stopped him, or I don't remember what happened in that episode. Somehow they stopped him, and they were kind of like, well, that was weird. And we see behind the scenes some shadowy figure that we don't know who this is yet. And then we see her again in Redemption, parts 1 and 2. And there she's almost controlled the entire Klingon Empire as like a puppet master, which is super impressive. But she doesn't get away with it. They catch her just in time until she shows up in Unification, parts 1 and 2. And really we see her in part 2, where now she's trying to secretly invade Vulcan and take over all of Vulcan. So, I mean, just the level of ambition is crazy, especially since it's not like she's the first Romulan in the world, right? But she's able to get so much further than anyone else has gotten against the Federation. It's truly impressive. And that's why she is on this list, because she's a genuine threat. And she also kind of matches wits with Picard and with the Federation. Like if it was somebody who wasn't quite as on top of it, she would have totally gotten away with all of this. Okay, just checking in the chat. So we have we also have Sayla, who came back into Star Trek Online, which is good because after Unification Part 2, we never hear about Sayla again, and we never see her again. And I don't remember anything really happening to her. I mean, her plan to take over Vulcan fails, and she's upset, and she has to go back to Romulus, like not having completed her mission. But we don't really see any consequences. Like she's still roaming free, as far as I know. She's the only blonde Romulan. She's almost the only blonde Romulan. There's this episode, what was it called? Maybe it was called The Defector, or maybe it was called something else. But but there was a human, I think he was human, from Earth, who defected to Romulus, who like wanted to become a Romulan. But then, oh, you know what? I think this was in Unification. But then Spock was like, no, peace, something, go back and tell him my plan for peace. So he goes to the Enterprise to tell him the big secret plan. And he's blonde. And he is like, me and my podcast co-host joke that he's the like least believable spy or the least believable defector in the history of defectors, because he just looks straight up human with a Romulan outfit and like the haircut. But yeah, but he totally looks like a spy. Hey, Carol. Hey. We are now on person 5, villain number 5 on my list, which is Sayla, Tasha Yar's daughter. And now we are on, did I say why I picked? Yeah, I said why I picked her. We're on villain number 6. Villain number 6 is Ambassador Alcar from the episode Man of the People. So in this episode, Ambassador Alcar, who's like this renowned ambassador, he can help bring peace between any warring civilizations, peoples, planets, what have you, in just this miraculous way. he comes on board with his mother. And shortly after coming on board, his mother passes away. And it's very sad. But then he says, hey, Counselor Troy, can you do this ritual with me to like grieve my mother's passing? And she's like, absolutely. Plus, he's been like trying to seduce Troy. So she's like, yeah, sure. Like, I'd love to help. Well, turns out he has some ability to psychically bond with people. And he tends to pick young, beautiful women. And basically, he pours all of his negative emotions and his uncomfortable feelings into them. He calls them receptacles so that he can be clear-headed during his negotiations. So this is how he keeps from getting upset or angry or anything else. He just pours all those emotions into someone else. So at this point, after his mom passes away, he passes this psychic connection on to Counselor Troy, and now she starts to age super, super, super fast. And they're like, something's going on now. The tricky thing he did was he said, you cannot autopsy my mom because that's against our cultural beliefs. So that there was no way for Beverly to get to the bottom of why did this woman who was elderly, yes, but not seemingly ill in any kind of way, pass away so suddenly and violently. Couldn't answer that question. Well, now that Troy is starting to age super fast, like within a matter of days, now Beverly is like, please, Captain, we have to do an autopsy. We have to find out what's going on. Otherwise, we might lose Counselor Troy as well. So he's like, all right, fine, do it. And at this point, I think Counselor Troy is like in a full-on coma, like she's almost done. So autopsy the woman, find out she's not related to Alcar at all. And not only is she not related to Alcar, she's not really 93. She's really like 23. She just looks super, super old. So then they're like, what the heck is going on? So Picard confronts Alcar. He's like, what are you doing to Counselor Troy? What did you do to that other woman you called your mom? And you know what? I don't even care what you're doing. You need to stop it right now before we can't recover Counselor Troy. And Alcar is just like, you know what? My business, like what I do as an ambassador, is so much more important than these receptacles. You must allow my work to continue. You can't stop me. You can't break the connection. And I'm not going to break the connection because I've got important work to do here. Peace out. And then has him like beamed off the planet so he can continue doing his ambassador stuff, his negotiations, which is like, what the heck? So they come up with this plan to simulate Counselor Troy's passing away because they know he has to psychically bond with another receptacle within like a short amount of time, like hours, in order for his emotions to not like back up on him or something like that. And they also know he already has his second person picked out because there was some, I don't even remember if she was an ensign or a delegate, but there's I think it's a woman from the planet. Yeah, I think it's a woman from the planet where he's doing the negotiations who's like taken a liking to him and he's kind of sort of been seducing her too. And so as soon as Troy is gone, as far as he knows, he's like, can you help me grieve? And he pulls the same trick on her, but the Enterprise is aware of it at this point. So they emergency beam her out or something. And then he's like, no. So there's no one in the room for him to psychically bond with and pour all his negative emotions into. So it all turns back and pours back on him. So what they do is they simulate Counselor Troy's passing. They actually do it with some kind of injection or something like that. And then they bring her back to life. But now the connection has been broken. Then they save the other woman before that connection can be formed. All the bad stuff pours back into Alcar. And he ages like 1,000 years in a matter of seconds. He just totally mummifies. And he's like screaming horribly, probably in pain. And I don't feel bad about that. I don't. Because I'm like, how long has he been doing this? The amount of aging that he went through, you're just like, has this been dozens of women, hundreds of women, thousands of women? How many years has he been doing this, treating people as receptacles? Because he feels like his life has a greater purpose than their lives. That is such an outrageous statement. And that is why he's on this list, because he thinks that his life is better than other people's lives, which is nuts. And while we're talking about people taking advantage of Counselor Troy, the next villain also falls in that category. And this is villain number 7. This is Jev from the episode Violations. So in that episode, Jev is part of a group of 3 people. They're Ulians, I think is what they're called. And they all have these really cool psychic abilities. They can kind of plant memories in people's minds, and they use it for like therapy, right? Like looking into people's minds and helping take away disturbing memories or something like that. I think that's what they're doing. I think they're always going on some altruistic missions or something like that. So it's 3 people. It's 2 guys and a girl. And Jev is one of the people, and he's like not super altruistic. I don't know. I'm guessing he probably helps when they're all helping, but when no one's looking, he's being super creepy. And he's going around and implanting his thoughts like purposefully into people's minds, and he's assaulting them in their minds, in their thoughts. And the assault is so horrific that it actually puts people into comas. So they go into a coma for like days. And when they wake up, they don't know what happened. I mean, it's awful. So it's got a kind of a little bit of amnesia to it as well. So when they wake up, they don't really know what happened, and no one else knows what happens. The medical community can't figure it out. And he's got his habit down to just like a couple of people per planet that they visit. So he'll assault like 3, 4, 2, 3 people. And then he'll exactly Star Trek roofies. He'll assault like 2, 3 people at this planet, and then he'll like assault 2 or 3 people at this other planet. But it's kind of spaced out so you don't put them all together until he's on the Enterprise. So he starts by assaulting Counselor Troy in her mind, and she's like freaking out. And who can blame her? Because this is something you can't even. It's as bad as physical assault, but it's almost worse because you can't even fight back. Right? It's in your mind. So he assaults her, and while she's trying to figure out what's going on, what happened to her, why this is happening, she tells a couple of people. She confides in a couple of people. So he assaults them too. So they all end up in comas. So now they're like, what the heck is going on? Instead of spreading it out across planets, we've got 3 people in comas right now on the Enterprise. So they're like, is it some virus? They're doing their whole checks and balances thing. And then here's like the topper. Here's the clincher to this person. Well, the second to last. Here's the second to last clincher to this person. When they finally discover, okay, it's got to be one of the Yulians because it's nothing else. There's no viruses. It's nothing else. It's got to be one of the Yulians. So they bring the 3 Yulians together. Or maybe they just bring Jeb and the woman, I don't know, but they do some kind of like hypnosis where they're like, Counselor Troy, we're going to help you remember what's going on. And then when the memory comes back, Jeb implants, instead of him in the memory, the other guy in the memory, which I don't remember the other guy's name, but I know the woman didn't even have a name in the episode because these characters, I guess, weren't that important. But he implants the image of the other guy so that they're like, oh, it was so-and-so all along. And Counselor Troy's like, thank you so much, Jev, for saving me from so-and-so. So they arrest him, and they're going to take him back to the Yulian people for some like terrible punishment. And so later on, so that's the second worst thing. This is the top worst thing is later on, Counselor Troy is just thanking Jev profusely in her quarters, just the 2 of them, where he's like, thank you so much for helping me find out who it was and making sure that guy's, in our brig now and that I'm safe and all this stuff. And Jev is just like, yeah, it's such a terrible thing that I can't believe he would do that. His punishment's going to be so severe. And she's like, well, I'm not trying to hold a grudge or whatever. And then he goes, why do you have to be so nice? And then he starts assaulting her again in her quarters. You're like, oh my gosh, this man just can't stop. So thankfully, because he's actually in the room with her, she is able to fight back. And she fights back like crazy. If you haven't seen that episode, maybe don't watch the whole thing. It's super traumatic. But watch the last 5 minutes because he tries to assault her. And she just picks up everything she can get her hands on in the room. She's slapping, she's kicking, she's punching. I think she hits him like a data pad over the head or a vase or something. And she fights. Ultimately, he like picks her up and tosses her across the room. So that fight didn't last for too long. But thankfully, as soon as he does that, Worf comes in and punches him in the face and knocks him out. And so good. They catch him. He goes away. Punishment ensues of some kind. And Counselor Troy is saved. But man, if anyone deserves to be on the list of the worst villains, it is Jev. He is terrible. And along with the, I kind of, wish, along with the where are they nows, I kind of wish we learned more about the punishment that he was going to have, because he just says like, oh, the punishment's quite severe. I want to know the punishment. I want to know what's all the punishment that he gets, but we don't get to know that. So I guess we just have to trust that all is well. Yeah, I never trust people who are too perfect, says PS2 Cypher. Yeah, like he's not, and he wasn't even that perfect. He was creepy. He was creepy the whole time. But it seemed like he wasn't a bad guy until you're like, no, he's a super bad guy. Do not recommend. Okay, number 8 on the list of worst villains is Gul Madrid. And this is the Cardassian from the episode Chain of Command Part 2. This is the person who tortured Captain Picard and kept trying to get him to say there was a different number of lights than there really were. He has to make this list. He has to make this list, right? Because he was torturing Picard for we don't know how long, days and days and days. But it's not just the fact that he was torturing him. It's kind of like the way that he did it, the conversations that he had, which is torture, right? But the conversations he had, if you just say what I want you to say, you can have food, you can have water, you can have clean clothes. At one point, he's just strung up but Captain Picard is just strung up but naked in the middle of some some storage room on the ship. At one point, Gul Madrid has his daughter come in, and they're just like chit-chatting and having a good time while Picard's like strung up. And Picard is just like, I can't believe you would allow your children to see something like this. And Gul Madrid's like, what's wrong with that? Like, there's nothing, like, you're an enemy, you're a bad guy, you deserve whatever we can dish out, and this is what we're teaching her. And it's just so heartbreaking. I honestly think Chain of Command Part 1 and 2. Part 1 is more getting ready for the big mission, but like it sets up Part 2. I think those are like two of the best episodes of Star Trek because it's really meaty and deep. It's dramatic. It really hits you in the heart. You see that, like, the actors are phenomenal, but you see in Gul Madrid kind of the cold, calculating precision that goes into someone who really enjoys misery, causing other people misery. So, but I can't say it's one of my favorite episodes because it's such a bummer, right? It's like so upsetting. But Gul Madrid absolutely has to make this list as one of the worst villains in Star Trek TNG, or I guess maybe you could say best villains, because he does it well. We actually don't even know. I don't know who named him Gul Madrid because no one ever says his name in the entire episode. But if you Google it, if you look it up, that's what it says his name is. So I just thought that was interesting. He was also in Star Trek 5. Was he in Star Trek 5 as Gul Madrid, or just the actor was in Star Trek 5 as something else? Because sometimes these actors show up again and again, which I love. If you've seen K'Ehleyr, she shows up in Star Trek like 8 different times as different characters, and Susie Plaxton is the actress, and she's amazing. Okay, number 9. We are on the 9th villain to make the list. And this villain is Lore, Data's brother, the other Soong-type android that's roaming around the Alpha Quadrant. So we see Lore. To me, it feels like we see Lore so many times, but actually we only see him about 4 different times. Let me count. 1, 2, 3. Yeah, we only see about 4 different times. So the first time we see Lore is in Data Lore, where Data goes back to the planet where he was created, and it's all devastated because the crystalline entity ate everyone, consumed everyone. And the crystalline entity, which originally was on my list, it's not on my list anymore, but it was on my list as a really good villain. It destroys everything, like planets, starships, everything. And it destroys things by absorbing all of the living things, like material, for energy. So that means on this planet, on the space station that they went back to, where they found Lore, there was no plants, animals, there wasn't even bacteria in the soil. Like, every living thing was completely destroyed, and the crystalline entity ate it. It doesn't have a mouth, but you know what I mean? It ate it. So they find Lore and they reactivate him, and Data's like, wow, there's another one of us. And Lore's like, brother, I love you so much. And then immediately deactivates him and tries to take over his identity because Lore is the evil twin. And Lore has emotions. And Lore was the one who caused the crystalline entity to come in the first place. And that's because all of those people in the colony, all the colonists, didn't like him. They didn't like him because he's a jerk. Because he's a jerk, that's why Noonien Soong and his wife said, let's make another version of this android, because this android's a little too volatile. And that's why they made Data with no emotions at all. Because they were like, with emotions, trying to make him more human, we kind of made a psychotic person. But how about we make them a little less human, and maybe they'll be more balanced person. So that's where Data came from. Anyways, so Lore was responsible for just all this destruction. And when they're kind of hot on his trail, and Wesley figures it out, of course he does, and they're trying to find Lore, Lore sticks the crystalline entity on the Enterprise. Of course he does. So they end up beaming him out into space. And we just see him kind of floating away by the crystalline entity. And we're like, oh, that's sad. But then we see him again in the episode Brothers, where he shows up again because Noonien Soong was passing away. And he sent out some signal that caused Data to come to him so he could give Data his final present. His final present was a chip for emotions. When he goes to give it to Data, he was tricked. And it was Lore, because Lore again hit Data's off switch and switched places and stole Data's emotion chip, like the last gift from Noonien Soong. And then he like roughs him up a bit and disappears. So the Enterprise comes, they find Data, turn him back on, just in time for him to kind of say goodbye to his dad. And that's like, I don't know, Lore, I understand Lore having daddy issues. I get that, because his dad literally was like, I don't know about you. We kind of want a better one. You know what I mean? He kind of was like, I think we want a version 2 of you. It was a rejection. It was a slight, but the colonists weren't responsible for that, like sicking the crystalline entity on everybody. That was kind of rough. Then we see him again in Descent, parts 1 and 2, where he finds a bunch of Borg drones who've been disconnected from the collective, including Hugh, and a bunch of other drones that are no longer connected. So they don't know what to do. Like, they're in total chaos. They need a leader because drones cannot function without some kind of central consciousness helping to control their actions. So Lore comes by and he's like, I'm going to help you. I'm going to be the savior. You guys are this combination of biological and technological distinctiveness, but I am all technological and I am the ideal. So what we're going to do is we're going to turn you guys from cyborgs into pure androids just like me. Little did we know, he does not know how to do that. So he's just mutilating just dozens and dozens of Borg who are already pretty mutilated, but he's mutilating them beyond all repair, beyond even being able to function. And he just calls it a necessary sacrifice to perfection, which is so messed up. And that's why he's on this list, because he's just the worst. Like, he will sell out anyone or anything for power. Ultimately, he wants love and acceptance, but the way he goes about it is so extremely destructive. And I think, probably if we look up space narcissist, he would be, in the dictionary, his picture would be there, right? Where he just wants the entire universe to bend to his will and to just love him. And at the same time, he doesn't understand love at all. So those episodes are all great. Highly recommend. And then we have, I agree that Laura is one of the best villains in Star Trek. I agree. I'll put him as number 9. And then we have number 10, I think the very best worst villain in Star Trek, which are in Star Trek The Next Generation specifically, and that is the Borg Queen. I guess technically you could say it's the Borg, because the Borg Queen is not in the series. She doesn't show up until the movie First Contact. But I feel like since the Borg were introduced in Next Generation, I could include the Borg Queen. She is the central consciousness for the entire Borg collective. She's the heartbeat. She's the mind. She's their organizing principle, which is nuts. Because when we first meet the Borg, they do act like drones. They do act like, like worker bees. But we don't even know that there is a central command. We're just like, I don't know, somehow there's just like this amalgam that are all in the same mission and they just know what to do and they figure it out. When we find out about the Queen, we're like, oh, shoot, there's actually a consciousness behind this with a very specific mission. And assimilation is so important because it is how they reach perfection, which is their ideal state. So she's an incredible villain. When we meet her in First Contact, she manages to seduce Data, almost completely seduce Data, which is so impressive because how do you even seduce someone without emotions? And she convinced him almost to take over Earth. And really the goal is like the whole Federation, right? The whole history of Earth and Federation, all that stuff. And her arguments are really solid. Like at the end, you think that Data has turned, and it's terrifying until you realize that, oh no, it's like a double cross or whatever. And then she keeps coming back again and again and again, even though she keeps getting destroyed again and again and again. So that part I don't really understand, but the Borg Queen's amazing as a villain. She's very complicated. She's very interesting. She's the one individual in a sea of collectives, which is just such a cool idea. And I will say, when they first came up with the idea for the Borg, they had been playing around for a long time with creating an alien that looked like an insect. Okay, so this was like something that was ever since season 1. They really wanted an alien that looked like an insect. If you notice, most of the aliens look a lot like humans. Maybe they've got forehead ridges or something on their nose or different ears or like different haircut or maybe like jewelry or whatever, because actors are humans, right? But they wanted to do really different types of aliens. They had those furry aliens in that episode, the Dolphin, or however you pronounce that. And every time they did furry aliens, it just was like not good. It was just very bad. Their furry aliens were bad. They had those big fish aliens in Manhunt, which I think was season 1. They had the Antikins and the Cele in season 1, which was like a big snake thing and a big wolf dog thing, which were also very bad. So every time they went away from like a humanoid, it just was kind of a disaster. But they had always wanted an insect-like creature. In fact, if you remember the episode, I don't remember the name of this, but it had the bad guys were the Shellyak, and these aliens wanted to come and take back their planet from the humans that were colonizing, and they wanted those aliens to be insect-like, but they just could not create an alien type makeup that looked like an insect but that a human actor could wear or walk in. So with the Shellyak, they had like a buzzing sound whenever they heard communications from them. And they were like, oh, their language is so complicated. The universal translator doesn't work and blah, 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 blah. So they had kind of like this buzzing sound, but that's the closest they could get to insects. And then when we finally see the Shellyak, it's just like a person wrapped in a big comforter with some glowy lights in a cave. So it didn't really work out. But what they decided to do eventually was to, instead of trying to make an alien creature that looks like an insect, they decided to just keep the idea of the hive. And that's where the Borg came from. What if we just did aliens that acted like insects, but they don't look at all like insects, because we cannot pull that off with our special effects. Instead, they went with the cyborg look, which I think is so good. Like the look is so solid. Even to this day, it totally looks amazing. Best idea they've ever had. An amazing call. Okay, let me check the chat. The Borg Queen is like an omni-villain, an avatar to every present threat. What is really scary is that the Borg are capable of reason, but only when their species is threatened. Yeah, that's true. I think that's why, wait, let me keep reading. I love how they incorporated and progressed the Borg Queen story in Picard. Yet I love how the Borg Queen just keeps going. Like, because she was finished in First Contact, and it was like, oh man, she was such a good villain. But then you see her again in Voyager, like a bunch of times, and then you see her again in Picard. So like they just keep bringing her back because she was just too good. She was too good to just have her one time and then never see this villain again. What was I going to say about the Borg Queen? Omnipresent, really scary. Yes. So what I think makes the Borg the most, the best, worst villains on Star Trek: The Next Generation is the fact that they are not malicious, like kind of any other villain, like Lore. Lore is so driven by passion. He is so just mad and angry and jealous and all these things. And that's what makes him act. But then he acts really foolishly and he gets himself in trouble, right? He has the Borg drones rebel against him because it's clear he doesn't know what he's doing. But the Borg are clinical, right? Assimilation is a strategy that they use. They don't even assimilate everything or everyone. If you were to walk into a Borg cube and you didn't pose a threat, they wouldn't even mind you. They wouldn't even try to assimilate you. They wouldn't bother at all, which is crazy. But if you become a threat, they're going to assimilate you right away. They do not assimilate species who are not warp capable. So if your planet doesn't have any warp drive, they're like, why bother? Your technological distinctiveness is so far below ours, it's not even worth it. So they're kind of like picky and choosy with who they assimilate. They don't always attack you if you're not a threat. But then when they do decide to attack you, they just keep coming. Oh my gosh, if you have ever played, I think it's called Starfleet Command on the Oculus, there's like this one level where you play against the Klingons, but there's this other level where you play against the Borg. And oh my word, like I can't beat either of those levels. But it's like every time you run away, they find you. They just keep coming. They are relentless. And that's why the Borg are number 10, the best, worst villains in Star Trek: The Next Generation. I also have an honorable mention for Q, because sometimes Q's a villain and sometimes he's not, depending on his mood. So I wasn't really sure where to put him on this list. So honorable mention to him. And that's it. So were there any of your favorite villains that I missed? If so, please drop it in the comments and let me know. Okay, let me check the chat. Okay, I think you would have liked Farscape. They have a ton of creativity in their aliens. You know, I have never seen Farscape. Like I've seen it, but I don't think I've ever seen an episode of Farscape. So probably. I really love alien makeup, so I probably would like it. I really like space stories, so I probably would like it. It worked out really well in the end with the Borg and Data dynamic. Okay, so yes, so when Picard meets with the Borg Queen, she's immediately like, Locutus, it's you. And you're like, oh my gosh, she remembers him that, like it's just so crazy, right? And she tries to seduce him. What I love about the Borg Queen is she tries to seduce everybody. She tries to seduce everybody. She tries to seduce Janeway. She tries to seduce Seven of Nine. Like if you come in her orbit, she's going to try to seduce you. And the crazy thing is she just might do it. Because when she's saying all of her arguments, you're like, yeah, I mean, I do want harmony and peace. That sounds great. And then she's like, yes, through assimilation. You're like, oh, I don't know about that. That part didn't sound so great. But this character is just, she's so compelling. And so when she tries to seduce Data, who has no emotions, you're like, how's that going to work? And of course she dangles before him the very thing he wants is humanity emotions. And she, part of his like biological parts gets melted off or something, like his skin, his face, something gets melted off. And then she puts like some skin on it. She grafts some skin to it. And then it has like little hairs on it, and she blows on it so he can feel the sensation that he can never feel before in his android body. And that was just like, he's like, oh, like that was enough for him. The fact that she knew the exact notes to play for Data is so impressive. It's just like she seems unstoppable, but they managed to stop her. But she seems totally unstoppable. And then you have this whole army of drones who just do whatever you want, are at your beck and call. It's amazing. And then they have all this crazy technology that's so much better than whatever the Federation has. Like they have these like, what do they call those conduits where they can just fly between like the Alpha Quadrant and the Delta Quadrant in a matter of hours. I mean, yeah, that was like an unbeatable foe. Okay. You will fall in love with Farscape. Good to know. Most Borg want to reconnect with the Hive. Yeah, all Borg want to reconnect with the Hive because that's how they function. And whenever they're separated, couple things. When they're separated, they have a homing beacon so that the Borg can come and collect them, because the Borg don't leave, they're dead, depending on the episode. Usually, though, the Borg don't leave, they're dead. They come back to collect the technology. And because Borg are kind of like zombies, they're never really dead, you know? But at the very least, they can take off all their augments and stuff and put it on the next person that they assimilate. But if they're disconnected somehow, they want to get reconnected. If they're lost, they want to be found. Even if they've been blasted away, usually the Borg come back and collect them. So there's a strong desire to stay with the group. So when 7 of 9 was severed from the collective in Voyager, she wanted to go back. But ultimately, they convinced her that being a human is way better than being a Borg. I don't know if she ever totally bought that. And then later on, when the Borg Queen is talking to 7 of 9, she goes, oh, do you think that you think you really got away? You think the Federation really like stole you? I let that happen. I let you be severed because I wanted an inside man. And you're like, oh, the Borg Queen would do something like that. You're just like, wow, even that was like a plan inside of a plan. Yeah, it's crazy. I started listening to the Delta Flyers. Isn't that podcast so good? It's kind of fun, not as fun as your TNG podcast was, though. Oh, thank you so much. And Carol, that's you from the email list, right? Like that's you who used to listen to our podcast like every single episode. Yeah, the podcast, the Delta Flyers podcast, which is it's a podcast about Voyager. It started out about Voyager, and the hosts are the actors who played Harry and Tom. And they just went over episode by episode all of Voyager, and now they're going episode by episode through all of Deep Space Nine. But they're telling you all the behind the scenes stuff of what the actors actually experience. And it's so fascinating. And the guy who plays Harry is just hilarious. I don't know. He just has me cracking up every single episode where he's talking about like the things he remembers and the things that he did and the things that people said. And it's hilarious. Okay. Yeah. I thought that was you, Carol. Last time I was like, is that the same Carol? Yeah, it's a super good podcast. Okay, they have a similar concept in DS9 with the changeling Great Link compared to the Borg Hive mind. That is super interesting. You know what's I don't know if interesting is the right word, but something that so the podcast that Carol was just referring to is called the TNG podcast. So it's a Star Trek show. It's all about Star Trek: The Next Generation. And something that she and I, my podcast co-host, one of my best friends, and I noticed in our rewatch is that there's a lot of rinse and repeat in Star Trek. But you don't notice it because each crew is different and each ship is different and the missions are different. So it just seems totally different. But if you look at the first season of The Next Generation, those first couple episodes were straight up ripped off from the original series. Like almost the same title, like the same concept, the same ideas. And you're like, did they really just do the same thing? I mean, you got to like do something new. No, they did the same thing. So we were like, oh, I guess that's just a TNG thing because there's that 30-year gap between the original series and TNG. So maybe, they're just like revamping the fans because now the parents who were kids watching it, now they're parents and they have their kids watching it, which is when I joined. So it's like, they just want something for the parents, right? But then we started reviewing Voyager and we're like, why are the first few episodes Voyager episodes straight from TNG? Like straight from TNG. And then we're like, okay, that's weird. And then as you keep going, it's like series to series to series. You're like, wait, this reminds me of this. Didn't I see this episode before? In fact, there's an episode of Voyager, which I don't even remember the name of, but there's this episode where like Tom is accused of having an affair with this married woman and doing away with her husband. The same thing happens in TNG. There's an episode where Riker's accused of having an affair with this married woman and doing away with her husband. And it's like, it's so funny because I remember watching that and being like, I thought I saw this episode already, and feeling like some of the plot lines weren't the same as I remembered. But that's because it's 2 different episodes that's the same exact thing, but just with 2 different ships and different cast and like slightly different situations for the married couple. So there's just like, yeah, a ton of rinse and repeat. A ton of rinse and repeat. But I guess if it's not broke, don't fix it. However, I will say some of the episodes that were repeated were not like the best ones. So like the Naked Now was a straight up repeat. And I don't think that was that great. However, I laughed a lot watching it. So there's that. The guy in the mini skirt tunic. Yeah, those are called scants, turns out. The guy in the scant imprinted in my brain for the first episode. Yeah, so the actress who plays Counselor Troy was just reminiscing on the first season of the show. And she was saying, like, you know how they always had her wearing something really revealing. But when she had to wear that little mini skirt, she was like, I didn't feel so bad wearing it because at least there were men running around the ship wearing that as well. People wore those scants all the way through season 1. I think a couple of times in season 2. But it was really heavy in like the beginning of season, like the first episode, maybe the first 2-3 episodes, guys in scants and girls in scants. And those outfits were awful. And then I don't know if it was viewer feedback or what, but you see a dramatic decrease of those uniforms. And then they're just like in the background, the extras are wearing those little scants. And I think that's because they have like a set number of uniforms, and they just, especially for the extras, they just reuse the uniforms that they have. Oh, we need 10 extras. Okay, what can you fit in? Okay, throw on a scant. Pretty sure that's how that went, because we only see them on men in those first 2 or 3 episodes. And then every time we see them after that, they're only on women, but they're always in the background. The only people who got like fresh, brand new, spanking new outfits every time was the main cast. Like the main people who were on the posters, they got new outfits like every time. They had like 10 versions of that same outfit, and they would get tailored into it every single time before they went for a shoot. Turns out though, they didn't all have their own shoes, which is what we find out about in Delta Flyers. When Harry Kim got his first pair of shoes for the show, he looked inside his shoe and it said B. Spiner. So these were Brent Spiner shoes, the actor who plays Data. They kept his shoes from TNG to give to people in Voyager to wear. And Harry Kim, the actor who plays Harry Kim, Garrett Wong, was so offended. He was like, how dare you give me Brent Spiner's shoes? I want my own shoes, because the only person who got brand new shoes was the captain. Nobody else got new shoes. There's just like a box of used shoes that everybody got. It was just, really funny story. Definitely recommend listening to Delta Flyers. The Salamander episode was all Voyager. Thankfully, the Salamander episode was all Voyager. That's got to be one of my least favorite. That's easily one of my least favorite Voyager episodes. I almost want to do an entire live stream of just my least favorite episodes. But if I did it for TNG, there's so many least favorites. There's almost all of season 1, which is like least favorite. That would be a really long episode. Okay. Just checking the chat. All right. So I think that's it. I think that's all I had to say about the best, worst villains of Star Trek: The Next Generation. Now, I did not talk about the best, worst villains in all of Star Trek, because there are so many shows and so many villains. I would never end. And even in TNG, there's so many villains. So many villains to choose from. But I picked the ones that I think really emotionally made me either impressed because they were so evil, or just disgusted because they were so evil. It was a great list of villains we love to hate. Yes. Thank you so much for that, PS2 Cypher. Thanks for joining, Carol. Thanks for joining everyone else who's been here in the live. And thank you for joining everyone who's been tuning in to the replay. Okay, I think we need a list of empathetic villains. That'd be a shorter list. That'd be a much shorter list of villains we don't love to hate, of villains we feel a little bit sorry for. Yeah, I don't know if I could scrounge up 10 of those. But yeah, that'd be an interesting list. Okay, thank you everybody for coming. I hope to see you next week on our next Savage stream, which is happening every Wednesday at 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern. So I will see you all next time. Live long and prosper.